Patrick Lane died on March 7th of this year, 2019, and it's Sunday, and I felt like it was right to kind of mark this, to do whatever honor I can to a guy who I only knew extremely briefly as a teacher. I mentioned in our earlier video that he was my very kind of my true introduction to poetry, or my introduction to that poetry could be done by actual living people. Here was this gentleman who was, of course, me being ignorant at the time, was already an acclaimed Governor General, I believe, at this Governor General award-winning poet. It's the highest kind of award you can win for poetry in Canada. Teaching first-year completely green students right out of high school, right out of just ignoramuses. I mean, teaching a first-year class, I would think for most professors it's the crap job. You get to teach the ones that all the high school students who think that, oh, I'm some entitled little snot who's just gonna, maybe I'll come to class, maybe I won't, maybe I'll suck things up. You haven't weeded out kind of just the people who are like who don't realize that you need to actually apply yourself. But Patrick Lane was somebody who took those people and kind of brought the power of words, brought the power of poetry to them, brought the power of this is something where you can create, you can take the rawness of your own life, the hurt, the pain, the beauty, and turn this into something more. He was a guy who only went as far as high school, graduating apparently from Vernon. He is from the interior of BC. I think that's a key thing about Patrick Lane, maybe where I do have connections with him. He was born in Nelson, seems to have done a lot of stuff like in the Okanagan Valley, which is where I come from. I grew up for my first 20 years in Kelowna, on the Okanagan Lake. He was a guy who was very complete, kind of a working class guy who was worked just like lumber yards, construction jobs, stuff like that before he kind of decided, no, I want to be a poet. And he came from a family where his brother, Red Lane, was someone who was also kind of a notable as a poet who died very young, also of a heart attack. His brother died at 28 of a heart attack, and Patrick Lane passed away of a heart attack. This year. Patrick Lane's born 1939 and died in 2019. Was kind of somebody who came from much more of a working class background, was someone who was though like most poets, I think anywhere nowadays, he made his living through the universities, through that sort of thing. He was never a part of that. And I think that was a key thing that he brought to us first year students, was that poetry wasn't this intellectual, lofty, we're going to make references to other stuff that nobody else can understand. He's somebody who is intensely interested in honing his words. He wasn't like an ignoramus about other poetry. He knew obviously had a deep understanding of poetry, but was somebody who was also able to say, but this is about life. This is about you using all this rich heritage to reflect your own personal life, whatever that life is. And it does not have to be something that is kind of completely lofty in the brain. In some ways, you have to connect the two. You're using your intellect to connect with your heart. And I mean, a heart is a big part. It's interesting of the imagery that comes up in Patrick Lane's poetry. I'm not actually the biggest reader of Patrick Lane's poetry. I'll get to that in a bit. But the heart is something that comes up. His father was murdered and shot in the heart, and his brother, as I said, had died of a heart attack. Well, it was a heart attack, an aneurysm. Where am I going with this? So yeah, I just wanted to kind of give tribute to this fellow. With all, it's funny, I went to the UVic's creative writing program, and the one thing I never did, and for the most kind of continued to avoid after that, was actually reading any of the work of the professors. There was something about that. I even find that now, if like I know too much about a writer, I don't really want to look at their work because it muddies my waters, or it just confuses me too much. And so I'm probably the worst person to actually to give a testimonial to Patrick Lane's poetry. I've read and heard him read his poetry, and it obviously resonated with me as much as his life. If he was somebody who was, if because he shared his poetry in class, and that was like, wow, this is this real, I don't know how to put it, real, genuine, unpretentious guy that was kind of connecting with me. I think the other things that I have to say about Patrick Lane that probably connected with me is he is someone of my father's generation. Patrick Lane went through a lot of addiction issues and came out the other side. My father went through a lot of addiction issues and did not come out the other side. And so there's somewhat of a strong identification there. There's also the thing that Patrick Lane was somebody who was a lot of times through his life as a man was, as men do, kind of working out his kind of his feelings, his how to deal with the legacy of his father and what kind of man that was going to make him. So yeah, this is just I wanted to note this. I wanted to note this and to say, once again, thank you to Patrick Lane. Thank you for being a teacher in my life. You never knew me from a bump on a log. And the echoes and the reverberations that you've caused, even in my life, have been quite profound in a lot of ways. I can't list them off, but it's obviously it's still there. I'm talking about you all these years later on the sad event of your death. And I'd like to just end off by reading a little bit of his poetry, just to give people who don't know anything about Patrick Lane just a little taste. This is from the very start of Fathers and Sons. I will walk across the long, slow grass where the desert sun waits among the stones, and reach down into the heavy earth and lift your body back into the day. My hands will swim through the clay like white fish who wander in the pools of underground caves, and they will find you where you lie in the century of your sleep. My arms will be as huge as the roots of trees, my shoulders leaves, my hands as delicate as the wings of fish in white water. When I find you, I will lift you out into the sun and hold you, the way a son must who is now as old as you were when you died. I will lift you in my arms and bear you back. And so that's from the beginning of Fathers and Sons. And I'd also just, here's another one that's just kind of another part of Patrick Lane, and I can read this one in full. It's Stars. Stars by Patrick Lane. Those lights in the sky, little butterflies of the night, little dreamers. Each time my lover rises to walk in the early garden, I watch her from the window. I cannot take my eyes from her. See how she leans inside the dawn, the cherry blossoms on her shoulders as she touches the cat who follows her everywhere, wanting only to be with her among the dark mosses. How much light there is in the high window of the night. How I wait, knowing for now. She comes to me, her small feet wet with dew, white as stars in those last hours. And that's from Too Spare, Too Fierce, and also from his selected poems from 1977 to 1997. So yeah, thank you, Patrick Lane, and my condolences to Lorna Crozier, his partner and fellow poet, and his family. Yeah, thank you. That's all I can say. Thank you. More videos later.